The condescending drawl sliced through the stale, recycled air of the cabin like a knife. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to move a little faster. This isn't a retirement home promenade." The voice belonged to Brenda, a flight attendant whose smile was as thin and brittle as old plastic. She gestured impatiently toward the back of the aircraft, her perfectly manicured nails a flash of crimson against the drab gray of the bulkhead. Her smirk was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a silent broadcast of her assumptions about the elderly black woman struggling to navigate the narrow aisle. But Brenda's campaign of humiliation was just getting started. "Some people just aren't cut out for air travel anymore," she continued, her voice pitched just loud enough for the surrounding rows to catch every venomous syllable. It was a power play, a public performance designed to establish her dominance over the couple she had already judged and dismissed. When Brenda leaned in and stage whispered to her colleague, "Is that a smell? Maybe they couldn't manage a shower this morning," she crossed a line. From her seat in 15B, their 13-year-old adopted daughter Maya felt a cold fire ignite in her chest. She had heard enough. What unfolded next would not only end Brenda's career, but would also send shockwaves through the entire airline industry, exposing its deep-seated prejudices to millions. It would prove that the most formidable warriors are sometimes forged in the quiet crucibles of love, legacy, and a history of fighting for the very dignity that was now under assault. This wasn't just any elderly couple, and this was certainly not just any 13-year-old girl. Brenda had no way of knowing, as she piled one indignity upon another, that she was targeting a family built on a foundation of American heroism and intellectual defiance. She couldn't have imagined that the quiet man whose trembling hands she mocked belonged to one of the last living Tuskegee Airmen, or that the woman she patronized had single-handedly desegregated libraries across the Deep South. She had made the fatal error of assuming that age and race signified weakness. Maya Vance was about to teach her, and the world, that a legacy of resilience doesn't fade. It is passed down, sharpened, and ready for the next generation's fight. Brenda was about to find out exactly where racist, ageist flight attendants belong, grounded, disgraced, and facing the full force of a history they chose to ignore. Let us journey back to a quiet, tree-lined street in Atlanta, Georgia, where this extraordinary story has its roots. Arthur and Eleanor Vance were not merely retirees. They were living monuments to a chapter of American history that demanded unimaginable courage. Arthur, at 91, was a man whose gentle demeanor belied a will of iron. As a young pilot with the 332nd Fighter Group, the legendary Tuskegee Airmen, he had flown missions over Europe, battling not only the enemy abroad, but also the pervasive racism of his own military. He had learned to fly with a precision and calm that defied the chaos around him, a discipline he carried through his entire life. He didn't speak often of the war, but when he did, he spoke of checklists, of maintaining composure under fire, and of the sacred trust between wingmen. These were the lessons that had kept him alive, and they were the lessons he had quietly instilled in his family. Eleanor, his wife of 65 years, was a force of a different kind. At 89, her mind was as sharp as the day she had earned her master's degree in library science, from a university that had only recently and grudgingly opened its doors to black students. In the 1960s, as a librarian in Alabama, she had waged a quiet but relentless war against segregation. She didn't march with signs. She armed children with books. She created mobile libraries that traveled to underserved black communities and single-handedly integrated the public library in her county by refusing to enforce its whites-only policy, daring the sheriff to arrest her for the crime of sharing knowledge. Her weapon was information, her strategy was meticulous documentation, and her belief was unwavering. The truth, properly organized and presented, was an unstoppable force. Together, Arthur and Eleanor had built a life defined by quiet dignity and profound impact. They had raised two successful children of their own, who were now grown with families scattered across the country. But their greatest challenge and their most profound act of love arrived 5 years ago, when they were well into their 80s. Maya was 8 years old, a child adrift in the Georgia foster care system. She had been passed through 4 different homes, each placement ending with the same labels: defiant, withdrawn, challenging. The trauma of her early years had built a fortress around her small heart. Most prospective parents, especially those of advanced age, would have been deterred by the file thick with behavioral reports. But Arthur and Eleanor saw what others had missed. They didn't see a problem child. They saw a brilliant, observant mind desperately seeking stability. They recognized the same fire of defiance they had both harnessed in their own youth. The adoption process was an uphill battle. Social workers expressed concerns about their age. Their own adult children worried about the immense physical and emotional toll it would take. Whispers in their community questioned the wisdom of an elderly couple taking on a child with such a troubled past. But love, when it is as patient and deep as the Vances, is a powerful solvent for doubt. Arthur spent hours with Maya, not with homework, but with model airplanes. He taught her the principles of aerodynamics, using the meticulous assembly process to teach her about patience, order, and how every small part contributes to a successful flight. He shared stories of his missions, not as tales of glory, but as lessons in strategy, risk assessment, and the importance of a calm mind in a crisis. "Panic is the enemy, Maya," he would say, his hands already showing the first signs of a tremor, guiding hers. "You assess, you plan, you act. You never let them see you sweat." Eleanor, meanwhile, transformed their home library into Maya's sanctuary. She didn't push Maya to read. She taught her how to research. She taught her the Dewey Decimal System as if it were a secret code. She taught her how to cross-reference sources, how to identify bias, and how to build an argument from a foundation of verifiable facts. "Words have power, my love," Eleanor would tell her, her finger tracing a line in an old law book. "But facts are the foundation that power is built on. Never go into a fight without your facts lined up like soldiers." Slowly, miraculously, the fortress around Maya's heart began to crumble. The defiant silences were replaced by inquisitive questions. The failing grades blossomed into straight A's. The withdrawn child who flinched at a touch became a young girl who would fiercely defend her new family. She absorbed more than just knowledge from her adoptive parents. She absorbed their ethos. From Arthur, she learned strategic calm. From Eleanor, she learned methodical advocacy. She learned that dignity was not something given, but something you carry within you, unassailable. But she also learned a harsher lesson. Despite their monumental contributions to their country, despite their status as respected elders, the Vances still navigated a world laced with prejudice. Maya saw the subtle ways waiters would bypass their table, the suspicion in the eyes of a store manager, the condescending tone of a bank teller. Each incident was a small cut, a reminder that the battles her parents had fought were not over. These experiences, painful as they were, became part of her education. Eleanor taught her to document them. Date, time, location, specific words used. "A memory can be dismissed as an emotion," Eleanor advised. "A written record is evidence." Now, 5 years later, the family faced its most daunting challenge. Arthur's hands, which had once so steadily guided a P-51 Mustang through enemy fire, now trembled constantly. A diagnosis of advanced Parkinson's disease had slowly begun to rob him of his physical independence. Local doctors had done all they could. Their last hope was a team of specialists at the renowned Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, who were pioneering a new experimental treatment. The consultation alone, not including the travel or potential procedures, would consume the last of their carefully guarded savings. They booked 3 economy seats on a direct flight from Atlanta. Eleanor's arthritis made the early morning departure a painful ordeal, but the appointment was too critical to reschedule. Maya, at 13, was no longer just a companion. She was the mission commander. She organized Arthur's complex medication schedule into a color-coded chart. She compiled a binder with every medical record, cross-referenced and tabbed for easy access. She researched Parkinson's terminology until she could speak with the fluency of a medical student. She was the buffer, the advocate, the guardian of their dignity on this frightening pilgrimage into the unknown. As they made their way to the gate at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, none of them could have predicted that the greatest threat to their mission wasn't Arthur's disease or the financial strain. It was a flight attendant named Brenda, a woman whose unexamined prejudices were about to collide with a legacy of quiet defiance and a young girl armed with the lessons of heroes. The stage was set for a battle at 35,000 feet, a confrontation that would be meticulously documented, shared with millions, and ultimately force a reckoning that would echo from the cabin of a single airplane to the highest corporate boardrooms. Maya Vance was about to show the world what happens when you mistake dignity for weakness and underestimate a child raised by giants. The assault began not with a shout, but with a sigh. It was a theatrical, put-upon exhalation from flight attendant Brenda as Arthur Vance paused at the entrance to the jet bridge, his 91-year-old body moving with the deliberate slowness dictated by Parkinson's. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his boarding pass, the simple piece of paper a sudden, frustrating challenge. "Sir, we have other passengers needing to board," Brenda said, her voice a cloying mix of feigned politeness and genuine impatience. The tone was instantly recognizable to Maya, the one people used when they saw age and blackness and decided patience was an optional courtesy. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm. "My husband has a medical condition. Please, just a moment of grace," she said, her voice low but firm. It was the voice of a woman accustomed to commanding respect, not pleading for it. Brenda's eyes did a slow, insolent roll. "Everyone has something these days," she muttered to her colleague, just loud enough to be heard. "If you can't handle the airport, maybe you should stay home." Inside the aircraft, the humiliation intensified. As Arthur carefully made his way down the aisle, his gait unsteady, Brenda shadowed him like a predator. Left, right, left, right. "Come on now, keep it moving," she chirped, as if speaking to a toddler. Several passengers looked up, their expressions ranging from discomfort to annoyance. A young man in a business suit in seat 7C, clearly irritated by the delay, let out an audible groan. Across the aisle, a woman in her late 30s with tired eyes, Dr. Ana Ramirez, watched the interaction with a flicker of professional concern. She recognized the shuffling gait, the slight tremor, classic Parkinson's symptoms. When they reached their row, the next battle began over the carry-on bag. It contained Arthur's essential medications, a change of clothes, and the heavy binder of medical records Maya had so carefully prepared. Arthur reached up to place it in the overhead bin, but a tremor seized his arm, making the movement difficult. "Here, just give it to me," Brenda snapped, snatching the bag from his grasp with a force that made him stumble. She shoved it into the bin with unnecessary roughness. "We don't have all day for this." "Please be careful with that," Maya said, her voice sharp. "It has my father's medical supplies." Brenda turned to her, a look of incredulous disdain on her face. "Little girl, the adults are handling this. You just sit down and buckle up." She dismissed Maya with a flick of her wrist, a gesture that said, "You are invisible, you are irrelevant." But it was the comment that came next that poisoned the air. As Brenda walked away, she leaned toward her colleague near the galley and whispered, a conspiratorial hiss that carried through the quiet cabin. "Did you get a whiff of that? It's like mothballs and something else. Did someone forget to shower before boarding?" Maya saw her mother's back stiffen. She saw her father's face, already clouded with the confusion of his condition, now register a deeper, more personal hurt. This man who had worn the uniform of his country with impeccable pride, who had faced down death in the skies of Europe, was being publicly shamed for his very existence. The systematic cruelty continued. Once they were seated, Eleanor realized Arthur's water bottle was nearly empty. His medication schedule was precise. He needed to take a pill with a full glass of water in 10 minutes to prevent severe side effects. She pressed the call button. Brenda appeared after a long delay, her expression bored. "Yes?" "Excuse me," Eleanor said politely. "My husband needs to take his medication. Could we please have a glass of water?" Brenda glanced at her watch. "The beverage service will begin once we reach cruising altitude. You'll have to wait." "I'm afraid he can't wait," Eleanor explained, her voice steady despite the rising urgency. "It's for his Parkinson's. It needs to be taken on a strict schedule." Brenda's face hardened. "Ma'am, federal aviation regulations prohibit service on the ground. Everyone has to wait. We can't make exceptions just because you didn't plan ahead." The lie was blatant and cruel. Maya knew from the countless flights they had taken for Arthur's treatments over the years that a simple request for water for medical reasons was always honored. This wasn't about rules, it was about power. But it's just water, Maya interjected, unable to stay silent. His hands are shaking badly. He needs his medicine. Brenda's gaze fell upon Maya, cold and dismissive. And I said, "No. Are you hard of hearing? Children should not interfere with the flight crew. One more outburst from you, and I'll have the captain come back here." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Eleanor reached over and squeezed Maya's hand, a silent plea for calm. Arthur, agitated and confused, began to mumble. "Eleanor, what's happening? Did I do something wrong?" Brenda seized on his distress. "See? He's disruptive," she said to the passengers in the surrounding seats, trying to recruit them to her side. "Some people get agitated when they fly. It's a safety concern." Dr. Ramirez in 8D felt a surge of anger. This wasn't agitation from flying. It was a clear symptom of Parkinson's, exacerbated by stress and a missed medication dose. The flight attendant wasn't just being rude. She was being medically negligent. She felt the familiar tug-of-war within herself, the desire not to get involved versus her professional duty. For a moment, she remained silent, a decision she would later regret. Across the aisle, Mr. Davies, the corporate lawyer in 7C, was still stewing over the delay. He saw an incompetent old man and an overbearing flight attendant, a messy human drama he wanted no part of. He put on his noise-canceling headphones and opened his laptop, retreating into a world of contracts and billable hours. He too chose silence. The minutes ticked by. Arthur's tremors worsened. His face was pale, beaded with sweat. Eleanor spoke to him in a low, soothing voice, but her eyes were filled with a desperate, helpless fear. She had always been able to protect him, to advocate for him, but here, trapped in a metal tube in the sky, she was at the mercy of a woman who held all the power and none of the compassion. Maya watched it all, her mind a cold, clear chamber of observation. She noted the time. She noted Brenda's exact words. She noted the name on her tag. She saw the other passengers turning away, choosing willful ignorance over intervention. She felt the lessons of her parents converge within her. Arthur's calm under pressure. Eleanor's methodical gathering of facts. She knew that panic was the enemy. She had to assess, plan, and then act. The breaking point arrived with a final casual act of cruelty. As Brenda passed their row again, she looked at Arthur's trembling hands and said to another passenger with a derisive little laugh, "Nervous flyer, I guess. Or maybe he's just excited for the drink cart." That was it. The mockery of his disease, the public spectacle, the utter dehumanization of the hero who had raised her. The quiet, observant girl vanished. In her place rose the granddaughter of a Tuskegee airman and a civil rights librarian. The legacy that flowed in her veins demanded a voice. Maya unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up in the narrow space between the seats, her 13-year-old frame suddenly imbued with an authority that defied her years. The cabin, which had been a low hum of individual concerns, was about to become a silent courtroom, and court was now in session. Brenda had no idea that her judgment day had arrived, delivered by the quiet child she had so carelessly dismissed. She was about to be cross-examined by a prosecutor who had been training for this moment her entire life. "Excuse me." The voice was not loud, but it possessed a clarity that cut through the cabin's ambient noise like a surgeon's scalpel. Every head within 3 rows turned. Maya Vance stood tall, her gaze locked on the flight attendant. "My name is Maya Vance, and I will not allow you to abuse my parents for one more second." Brenda spun around, her face a mask of disbelief. That this child, this irrelevant, invisible girl, would dare to challenge her was beyond comprehension. The shock on her face was captured by a dozen smartphone cameras that had quietly begun to record. "My parents?" Brenda stammered, her brain struggling to connect this articulate, defiant black girl with the elderly couple she had written off. "But they're so old." The sentence hung in the air, a clumsy, self-indicting admission of her prejudice. Maya's response was not an emotional outburst. It was a methodical, devastating indictment, delivered with the precision her mother had taught her and the calm her father had modeled. "They are my parents," she stated, her voice gaining strength. "My adoptive parents. And in the last 20 minutes, you have been racist, you have been ageist, And you have violated multiple airline policies and federal laws regarding the treatment of passengers with disabilities. A hush fell over the cabin. Passengers lowered their magazines. The man in 7C, Mr. Davies, slowly removed his headphones. This was no childish tantrum. This was something else entirely. The man whose trembling hands you just mocked, Maya began, her voice ringing with a righteous fury that was chilling in its control, is Master Sergeant Arthur Vance, a 91-year-old veteran of the United States Army Air Forces. He was a pilot with the Tuskegee Airmen. He flew a P-51 Mustang in 68 combat missions over Europe, defending the very freedoms that give you the right to a job where you can harass decorated war heroes. A collective gasp swept through the nearby rows. The mood shifted instantly from passive discomfort to rapt attention. The passengers weren't just watching a dispute anymore. They were witnessing an injustice against a national hero. The woman you patronized and dismissed, Maya continued, gesturing to Eleanor, is Dr. Eleanor Vance. She spent 30 years as a librarian in the rural South, where she defied segregation laws to ensure Black children had access to books. She created programs that changed thousands of lives and faced down threats from people who believed knowledge was only for a select few. These two people have done more to build this country than you could possibly comprehend. Brenda's face had gone from smug to pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but Maya gave her no quarter. You made a comment about them smelling. That is a vile, racist stereotype. You publicly berated my father for the slowness caused by his Parkinson's disease, which is a form of disability harassment. And you have refused to provide water for his medication, which is not only a violation of your airline's own policy for accommodating medical needs, but is also medically dangerous and is causing him significant distress. At the mention of medical negligence, Dr. Ramirez felt a jolt of shame for her own silence. She quickly, discreetly, hit record on her phone. She knew this was now a documented incident that required a professional witness. Maya then delivered the context that transformed the narrative from one of harassment to one of profound human struggle. We are not on vacation. We are flying to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. My father's Parkinson's is advanced, and we are traveling to see a team of specialists for an experimental treatment. We used every last cent of their retirement savings for this trip. This isn't a joyride for them. It is a mission for his life. The stress you are causing him is actively harming his health. The lawyer, Mr. Davies, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He looked at Arthur Vance, truly looked at him for the first time, and saw not an inconvenience, but a frail warrior on his last, most important mission. He saw the quiet dignity in Eleanor's face, the fierce love in Maya's, and he felt a profound sense of disgust, both at the flight attendant and at his own initial callous annoyance. They adopted me 5 years ago. Maya's voice softened for a moment, becoming intensely personal, drawing everyone in. I was in the foster care system. I was labeled a problem child. They were in their 80s and they took me in. They taught me everything I know about dignity, about justice, and about standing up to bullies who think they can diminish people based on the color of their skin, their age, or their physical condition. She turned her full attention back to Brenda, her eyes blazing. My father taught me how to stay calm under pressure. My mother taught me to document injustice. So let me be very clear. I have your name, Brenda. I have the exact time of each discriminatory comment you made. I have a list of at least 10 passengers who have witnessed your behavior, and you are in violation of the Air Carrier Access Act of 1986, which prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in air travel. You have failed on every level, as a flight attendant, as a representative of your company, and as a human being. The cabin was utterly silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the engines. Every passenger was frozen, witness to a stunning display of eloquence and courage. Then a new voice broke the silence. She's right. Dr. Ramirez stood up. The phone, still held discreetly at her side, felt like a dead weight in Dr. Ana Ramirez's hand, a testament to her own complicity of silence. Now standing, her voice clear and steady, she sought to balance the scales. I'm a physician, she announced, the words carrying the immediate authority of her profession. The passenger is clearly exhibiting advanced motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease, likely exacerbated by stress. Denying him water for his medication isn't just a breach of customer service, it is a dangerous act of medical negligence. I will be filing a formal complaint as a medical professional who witnessed this, and my recording will serve as my notes. The dam of passenger inertia, built of social awkwardness and a desire not to get involved, shattered completely. A second figure rose, this one more imposing. It was the man from 7C, Mr. Davies, the corporate attorney who had retreated behind a wall of noise-canceling headphones. Now his face was a mask of cold fury, aimed not only at the flight attendant, but at his own initial apathy. He held up his own phone, its screen glowing. "I am a corporate attorney," he stated, his voice resonating with a courtroom gravitas that silenced the last remaining whispers. "And I can confirm that the young lady's assessment is not only morally correct but legally sound. What I have witnessed here constitutes a clear, documented pattern of discrimination and harassment under the Air Carrier Access Act." "Mr. and Mrs. Vance," he said, turning to them with a deference that was profoundly genuine, "when we land, it would be my distinct honor to represent you, pro bono, in any action you choose to pursue against this airline." The cabin erupted, not in chaos, but in a unified chorus of affirmation. "We saw it all. Disgusting behavior. Give that man his water now." A young man in a university sweatshirt, the same one who had groaned in annoyance at the boarding delay, leaned into the aisle. His face was flushed with shame. He looked directly at Maya, then at Arthur. "Sir," he stammered, I'm so sorry for being impatient. What she did was wrong. We all saw it." Brenda stood in the eye of the storm, a shipwreck of a woman. The architecture of her authority, built on a cheap uniform and a sneer, had been demolished. She was exposed, her bigotry laid bare not by an equal, but by a 13-year-old girl who had wielded her family's legacy like a weapon. The practiced, rosy makeup on her cheeks was now a garish mask against the bloodless pallor of her skin. She was no longer a figure of power. She was a specimen, a case study in petty cruelty, pinned and displayed by the collective judgment of the very people she had tried to impress. She opened her mouth, but only a dry, clicking sound emerged. The quiet, invisible girl had done more than defend her family. She had started a rebellion at 35,000 feet, and the first casualty was Brenda's career. A junior flight attendant, a young woman named Chloe, whose face had been a portrait of escalating horror throughout the encounter, finally broke free from her paralysis. She darted forward, not with a single glass, but with a full, unopened bottle of water and a plastic cup. She knelt in the aisle, creating a barrier between the Vances and the disgraced Brenda. "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I am so sorry. This never should have happened." She poured the water with a steady hand, her simple act of competence and compassion a damning indictment of everything Brenda was not. Brenda, seeing her last vestiges of control vanish, made a final pathetic grasp for power. "This is a security threat," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Everyone must be seated immediately. I am calling the captain." "Please do," Mr. Davies boomed, a predatory calm in his voice. "I'm sure the captain will want to be immediately apprised of the multi-million-dollar lawsuit his airline is facing, which is currently being live-streamed by half the passengers on this flight. It might affect his landing announcement." The lead flight attendant, David, appeared as if summoned by the sheer force of the cabin's collective will. He was a tall man, with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that had seen everything. He took in the scene in a single sweeping glance. Brenda, cornered and hysterical. Chloe, kneeling like a supplicant. The attorney and the doctor standing as sentinels. And in the center of it all, the Vance family. He saw Eleanor, a pillar of contained fury, Arthur, whose tremors were now subsiding as he sipped the water, and Maya standing guard, her young face set with the resolve of an ancient warrior. David bypassed Brenda as if she were a piece of furniture. He knelt, just as Chloe had, bringing himself to eye level with Eleanor. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low, respectful rumble. "My name is David. I am the lead purser on this flight. I cannot begin to apologize enough for what you have endured. Please tell me everything." Eleanor Vance did not raise her voice. She did not weep. She simply recounted the events, her librarian's training manifesting in a precise, chronological, and utterly devastating narrative. She listed each insult, each act of condescension, each refusal of care, her words like perfectly indexed, irrefutable facts. As she spoke, David's gaze kept returning to Maya. He saw the fire in the girl, the fierce intelligence. He saw a legacy. When Eleanor finished, he remained silent for a long moment, then looked directly at Arthur. "Sir," he said softly, "as a veteran of the Marine Corps, I am honored to have you on this flight, and I am deeply ashamed of the disrespect you have been shown." He finally stood, turning his full attention to Brenda. The air grew cold. "Brenda," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth, "you are relieved of duty. Go to the rear jump seat. You will not speak to another passenger or crew member until we are on the ground. We will discuss the termination of your employment in Rochester." He did not wait for a reply. A career built on a foundation of prejudice had been publicly and irrevocably dismantled. The remainder of the flight to Minnesota unfolded in a surreal atmosphere of quiet solidarity. The invisible walls between strangers had dissolved. Dr. Ramirez moved to an empty seat closer to the Vances, discreetly monitoring Arthur's condition. Mr. Davies passed them a business card with a handwritten note on the back. "Whatever you need, no charge, ever." Passengers offered snacks, pillows, and quiet words of admiration. They weren't just apologizing for Brenda, they were apologizing for their own silence, for a world that allowed such indignities to occur. Arthur Vance, the man who had been dismissed as a smelly, trembling inconvenience, was now treated with the reverence befitting the hero he was. He didn't speak much, but he would occasionally meet Maya's eye and give a slow, deliberate nod, a silent transmission of pride that was more potent than any speech. Upon landing in Rochester, the expected jet bridge scrum was absent. The door opened to reveal not a crowd, but a single impeccably dressed man who was sweating through his silk shirt. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance, I'm Robert Harrison, Vice President of In-Flight Operations." His smile was a pained, frantic thing. "On behalf of the entire airline, I am here to offer our most sincere, profound apologies. We have arranged a private car to take you to your hotel. Your return flight has been upgraded to first class, and we will, of course, be refunding your tickets and covering any and all expenses related to this trip." He was reciting from a crisis management playbook, offering the standard currency of corporate apology, comfort, and cash. Eleanor Vance looked at him, her gaze as sharp and discerning as it had been when she evaluated a faulty historical text. She saw a man trying to put a price on dignity. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice clear and resonant in the quiet of the terminal, "we appreciate the gesture, but we do not want your first-class tickets. We did not undertake this journey for comfort, and we will not accept it now as compensation for humiliation." The executive was momentarily stunned into silence. This was not in the script. It was Maya who stepped into the breach. She had been observing him, not as a child looks at an adult, but as a strategist assesses an opponent. She saw the fear behind his corporate polish. "My mother taught me that you never accept an apology that isn't accompanied by a concrete plan for change behavior," Maya said, her voice impossibly steady. "A refund is a transaction. A first-class seat is a temporary comfort. Justice is a permanent change. So we have some questions for you." Mr. Harrison stared at the 13-year-old girl, who was now addressing him as an equal. "First," Maya continued, "what specific new subsection will be added to your employee training manual regarding the Air Carrier Access Act and accommodating passengers with non-apparent disabilities like Parkinson's? Second, who will design and lead this new training? Because we will insist that it is co-authored by organizations like the NAACP, the AARP, and the Michael J. Fox Foundation. Third, what will be the new zero-tolerance disciplinary process for employees who violate these protocols? And fourth, we would like a public written apology from your CEO, not to us, but to the Tuskegee Airmen, Inc., and to the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, for the disrespect shown to the institutions my parents represent." Arthur reached out a trembling hand and placed it on Maya's shoulder. It was his only movement, his only sound, but it was a coronation. Mr. Davies, standing just behind them, allowed himself a small, grim smile. He wasn't representing a victimized family. He was advising a force of nature. The days that followed were a strange duality. By day, they were immersed in the sterile, terrifying world of the Mayo Clinic, a world of MRIs, neurological exams, and hushed conversations about dopamine agonists and deep brain stimulation. The clinical coldness of it all was a stark reminder of their true mission, the battle against the relentless betrayal of Arthur's own body. But by night, their hotel room became a war room. The story had exploded. Fueled by dozens of cell phone videos and the eloquent outrage of Mr. Davies and Dr. Ramirez, it had become a national referendum on decency. The hashtags surrounding dignity at 35,000 Warner's Vance legacy trended for days. Maya became an accidental icon. News outlets clamored for interviews. She conducted them via Zoom from a chair pulled up to the hotel room desk, with Eleanor sitting just off camera, occasionally passing her a handwritten note. Maya never raised her voice. She never seemed angry. She simply told their story, always steering the conversation back to the larger principles. "This wasn't about one rude person," she said in one interview that was viewed over 10 million times. "It was about a system that allows people to see age and race as signs of weakness. My parents spent their lives proving that wrong. Their legacy is not a weapon, but it is a shield, and I just learned how to use it." One evening, after a particularly grueling day of tests, Arthur was sitting in his armchair, watching Maya on a national news program. His hands lay in his lap, the tremors a constant, rhythmic flutter. He looked at them, not with the frustration and shame he had felt on the plane, but with a kind of historical detachment. These were the hands that had gripped the stick of a P-51, that had held Eleanor's for 65 years, that had patiently glued together 100 model airplanes with a little girl who needed to learn about order in a chaotic world. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a soft rasp, "come look." Eleanor came and stood behind his chair, her hands resting on his shoulders. On the screen, their granddaughter was calmly and brilliantly dismantling the airline's carefully prepared public statement, pointing out its vagaries and lack of concrete commitments. "That day," Arthur whispered, "on the plane, when Brenda, was talking about my hands, I felt so small. I felt like all the strength had gone out of them. Just an old man's tremor." He paused, his gaze fixed on Maya's face on the screen. "But I was wrong. The strength wasn't gone. It transferred to her." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, but she did not let them fall. She squeezed his shoulders gently. Weeks later, the negotiations concluded. The airline, facing a catastrophic brand collapse, agreed to every single term. The Vance Initiative for Dignity in Travel was born, a multi-million-dollar, independently monitored program that would fundamentally change their training and accountability structures. The CEO's public apology was printed in every major newspaper. Their real victory, however, came on their last day at the clinic. The specialists had proposed a new, experimental therapy. It wasn't a cure, but it offered a chance, a glimmer of hope to slow the progression, to grant Arthur more time, more moments of clarity. It was a future they hadn't dared to imagine just weeks before. Flying home, they did not sit in first class. At Eleanor's insistence, they sat in economy, in the very same row. The flight crew treated them like visiting royalty. The pilot came back to shake Arthur's hand before takeoff. But the Vances were not focused on the crew. They were focused on each other. As the plane climbed through the clouds, breaking into the brilliant, unending sunshine, Arthur looked out the window. Then he turned to Maya, who was sitting beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You know," he said, his voice clearer than it had been in months, a benefit of the new medication regimen. "When you fly a mission, the most important thing isn't the takeoff. It's not the fight. It's bringing your plane home and making sure your wingmen get home too." He reached over and with a hand that still trembled but was now imbued with a renewed sense of purpose, he took hers. "You brought us home, Maya. You were my wingman." Maya squeezed his hand, her heart feeling too large for her chest. She looked from the pilot to the librarian, her heroes, her parents, her creators. The quiet defiance forged in the skies over Europe, and the methodical resistance built in the hushed aisles of a southern library had not faded with time. They had converged and concentrated, passing like a sacred inheritance into the heart of a girl who had once been lost. In the crucible of 35,000 feet, she had discovered who she was. She was not just a survivor of the system, she was a product of a legacy. She was Maya Vance, and she was just learning how to fly.